this ball of the great toe area, and this is a large area that is going to relate to the thyroid region primarily. This is where I like to do circular friction so I can cover this somewhat larger area a little bit more effectively. Now, one difference also with the left foot in this area is that the esophagus reflex passes through it, not on the right. That's because it leads to the stomach, which is found on the left side of the body. For that, I'll lots of times do just follow a line with the press, hold, release, repeating that, of course, and moving gradually towards the base of the toe, thinking I'm working the esophagus so that my intent is directed towards that particular reflex structure. That then leads us to the lateralmost portion of the ball of the foot, and that corresponds with zone 5, which is the little toe zone. This is all considered to be the shoulder area. Again, the shoulder is more lateral, and so with this, you have options to be able to work with either press, hold, release, or possibly the circular friction. Not as big of an area as the thyroid vicinity is, but still has a good bit of space to it. What that leaves now is all this area that's said to be above the diaphragm line, which is where the discoloration of the ball of the foot kind of ends, and the lighter colored, softer area is to be found. And all of this is going to be because it's the left foot, this will be the left lung. That's a lot of area. So my preference here is to do the circular friction so that I could cover this whole area rather than trying to do the press, hold, release, and target all of those. But if time's not an issue, you could be very diligent about doing that. So you might notice that I use the fingers of my holding hand to kind of brace, and then my working hand fingers press against those. That's just my own preference for working with this efficiently. So I'll do that circular friction for all of this vicinity. However, the heart is also found in this reflex area, so I will come back to that, and that's where I might do a press, hold, release, and a press, hold, release, very much close to that midline area, but slightly left of that, and I'll be thinking this is for the heart. So that covers and addresses most of this area that is just past the diaphragm line, but the diaphragm line itself is going to be an important one to work, and it has a little different manner of working. We typically will put a thumb on that diaphragm line. I like to start with the first zone, which means the big toe, and with my thumb in place, I use the holding hand actually as a working hand, and will press the foot against that working thumb. I repeat that at least 3 times, move my thumb to the next zone, repeat that multiple times. So it's a pressing of the foot into the thumb or other contact that may be in place here. I'm in the 3rd zone now. Oftentimes for the 4th and 5th zones, I'll change out my contact and then use my opposite hand for the pressing of the foot against the thumb or other contact. And that's zone 5. That's all for the diaphragm line. In zone number 1, on that diaphragm line, there's a solar plexus reflex. This one I tend to work by doing a very tight circular friction. So this is an overlapping reflex area. We're going to have several of these as we move through the foot because the organs overlap each other, just like what we saw with the heart overlapping with the lung reflex area. At this point, we shift gears and we're going to do a little work for the top of the foot. This is all going to relate to the interscapular area. So what you want to do is to plantar flex the foot at the ankle and kind of flex the toes. Now what you're looking for is the space between the metatarsals. First metatarsal, second metatarsal. It's going to feel like you're in a trough or a groove. This is where I like to friction in line with that groove, usually about 3 places. First one distal, next one proximal to that, and the next one proximal to that. You could be using a braced finger instead of a thumb for this. From there, I would just go to the next space between the now second and third metatarsals, rinse and repeat. Maybe I change hands out. Now I'm between the third and the fourth, and then finish out between the fourth and the fifth. That's all for the interscapular area, which will include rhomboids, part of trapezius, and the scapula, and more. So once that gets complete, we're pretty much finished with the whole area from the diaphragm line on out to the toes. We've covered a lot of ground. The next space that we'll be working in is between the diaphragm line and what is known as the waistline. The waistline doesn't have a visible line to it. It is found by sliding a finger along the lateral side of the foot, either from the little toe or from the side of the heel, and feeling for a bump. That's actually a tubercle on the base of the 5th metatarsal. That bump is going to designate a line running across as the waistline. So that waistline divides up between the diaphragm line and the heel line, what I call the upper breadbasket and the lower breadbasket. Essentially, this is all the abdominal cavity. Now, above the waistline to the diaphragm line, this is where we find major differences between left and right foot. On the left foot, in the space that is occupied by the big toe all the way to the middle or even the 4th toe, all that is going to be the stomach. When I have that, I'm going to usually use a circling type of approach so I can cover much of the territory in an efficient, a time-efficient way. All the way to, but not on that 5th zone there. So that would continue. I usually would spend more time with each of these, but that covers most of this whole area here. Next, I'm thinking, okay, in the 5th zone, halfway between the waistline and the diaphragm line, this is where the spleen is. This is a tight reflex, so I use a press, hold, release, press, hold, release, press, hold, release approach to be very specific with that. Last, with this area that I call the upper breadbasket, here's the waistline. Right along and slightly above that waistline through 4 of these zones, zones 1 through 4, in other words, big toe through the 4th toe. I'm going to also do some reflex work for this part of the pancreas. I know that the pancreas runs towards that spleen, so I usually just will go back and forth with a strumming that would mimic the direction that the spleen is found in. I like to start in the 1st zone and gradually work towards that 5th zone, but not all the way onto it, just towards it. Once I get to the 4th zone, I have done some good reflexive work for the pancreas. Again, it's also helpful just to visualize in your mind or think in your mind I'm addressing now the pancreas. That way your intent is a little bit more present. That completes the upper breadbasket between the waistline and this diaphragm, or sorry, this heel line, which is designated by the discoloration and the beginning of the callus of the heel. This lower breadbasket is going to feature mostly intestines. I like to start with the large intestine to sort of frame that area. So here's the waistline. I come to the first zone on that waistline, and I'm going to follow this transverse colon. I like to use a unidirectional type of frictioning here, working my way across all 5 zones, thinking, okay, I'm on this part of the transverse colon. And once I get to that 5th zone, then my next attention is along the 5th zone. This is the descending colon. Easiest is just to start here in the 5th zone at that heel line. And you have a choice. I mean, if you want to do still with the direction that that organ occupies, that's great. If you'd prefer to do circling on that, that works just as well. If you want to do press, hold, release, you have that as an option as well. There's a little bit of the sigmoid colon that is found in part of the heel area, and that usually is best addressed because of the thickness of the tissue here with a press, hold, release. So starting at about the 4th zone, which is the 4th lateral toe here, I just gradually work to the 3rd zone, which is the middle toe, and then I will finish out with the 2nd zone, 2nd toe, and finally the big toe, which is the 1st zone. And that will complete all of the large intestine on the left side. In that framed area, so most of the space between the waistline and that heel line is going to be small intestine. This is a larger area, so again, it's very helpful to use a circular friction here to cover much of the area. But you could easily do a strumming that goes one direction and then goes another. If you want to be very detailed, you could also do press, hold, release. So I usually follow an area that's closer to the waistline, and then I also follow an area that's closer to the heel line. I like to start with the 1st zone and work my way lateral, but it could be done in many different ways.